I waited for over 3 years for Primal the Awakening. I mean, we all did. That entire time, it has been one of my most anticipated games. Is it possible for a game to live up to that level of anticipation? Yes. Normally, no way. But this time, yes. Primal is a great game, but not a game for everyone. And the sad thing is, I think that if a few things had been done differently, it could have been a great game for a lot more people. I genuinely think that Primal could have been the next mass market drip feed lifestyle game, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves. I'm J. Allen Riker, horror author and solo board game fanatic, and this is my review of Primal the Awakening. I have so much to say about this game. Luckily, I have 3.5 hours of gameplay video to put behind this, so I've got plenty of time. First things first, I am a huge fan of the Monster Hunter video games. I've talked about this at length in my other Primal videos, the unboxing videos. I love the core loop. It's so addictive. Slay monsters, make better gear from their fangs, claws, and scales. Slay bigger monsters, rinse, repeat. Before Steamforged Games jumped in April of 2021, it looked like Primal was going to be the first board game to give us a pure Monster Hunter experience. I know that Kingdom Death Monster took a lot of inspiration from Monster Hunter, but it definitely did a lot of other stuff. But Monster Hunter World shipped better than a year earlier than Primal, even though it was crowdfunded months later. I still felt that Primal was the right choice, though I went on to back the second Monster Hunter World game, Iceborne, after experiencing and enjoying the node system in Dark Souls. And version 2 is often better than version 1 of a game, and I've heard that that's kind of the case with Monster Hunter, so I'm still happy with my decision. But the similarities between Primal the Awakening and the Monster Hunter video game series aren't just inspiration, like for Kingdom Death Monster. Reggie Games wanted to recreate Monster Hunter in board game form. That often spells trouble. And yet they completely achieved it and sacrificed nothing for the sake of this fidelity. It's really quite astonishing how they managed to achieve that. The mediums are so different that usually, unless it's like a board game or card game style video game, like staying close to the game source material can make for kind of a miserable game experience sometimes. But the further you drift away, the more that people complain that, you just slapped the IP on something. But this time, I feel like Reggie Games really considered the mechanisms and figured out how to make a board game feel like a real-time action video game. So in Primal, you play at least 2 hunters and set out to figure out why the monsters on this island are all rising up and going crazy. Those hunters circle the great beast, which sits at the center of the battle board facing one quadrant. You are only able to attack certain quadrants, which change as the monster goes through its 3 phases, growing more frantic as these tiny, soft gnats deal it more and more damage. And the way that you deal that damage is through the use of cards. In a system that has enough determinism to allow you to strategize and synchronize, but has enough randomness through card draws to make for desperate push your luck moments to see if you'll get the card that you need, or if the monster will seriously punish you with attrition damage because you decided, okay, I want this big combo, and so I'm not going to dodge and parry. At the end of the player round, they will face attrition damage, but they will have hopefully played enough dodge and parry cards to deal with this. But as they play their round, they will also face the reactions of the monsters, as each of the monster's 3 behavior cards have some sort of trigger on them, when the beast rotates, when a player starts their round in front of the monster, when the player plays a certain color of card. That adds a big layer of when to perform what actions, as these reactions can really wreck your character. But the thing is that you are in control of that. You can just avoid playing attacks this round, hold off, plan for a better combo next round. Despite the fact that I feel like I consider my choices in games very closely, I am really terrible at holding back. I really like to play aggressively, but sometimes I would see in the reaction cards too much retribution waiting for me, and it would overcome my impatience to attack this bully of a monster. If you hold back, you get extra energy to play cards the next round, which is very precious because your cards are not only your actions, but are also your currency. If you've ever played Marvel Champions, then you've experienced this. You will agonize over which cards to play and which ones to discard to pay for the ones that you play, because all the cards are good. I think that these choices are even tougher in Primal than in Marvel Champions, because in Marvel Champions, you just regularly are drawing cards that aren't right for the situation. But in Primal, they almost all feel right for the situation. It really is an agonizing decision which ones you just discard. But some cards do make that easier for you by having both something that it does when played and also a benefit that you get when you discard it. Maybe letting you do more damage or to draw an extra card. And the thing is that that's something that is true across the board with Primal the Awakening. If you stop and think, you will be rewarded with something that pays off. You will play the most satisfying combos that you've ever experienced in a game. You will deny the monster its attrition damage and even its reactions. You will lay low this huge creature, showing it that nothing stands in the face of human cunning and ferocity. Or you'll play like a berserker and you will die pathetically. Although there actually is, the Great Swordsman can play as a berserker, and it requires just as much thought. But I guess it's you, the player, that's experiencing that, not him, the character. There are few games where the gap between playing intelligently and playing poorly is as large as it is in Primal the Awakening. These monsters seem huge and overwhelming, and everything seems to be against you as they block off your abilities to attack, to stay in one place, or to move, depending on their behavior cards at the time. But when you take another minute to look over everything on the cards, another minute or 5 if you're me, you will see a path forward pretty much every time. You take this big beast and you manipulate it. You make it spin. You make it flail. You use its responsiveness against it. Sometimes, though, you just have to retreat. These minis of the monsters are about 100 times the size of the minis of your characters, so it makes sense. So I think that probably all sounds great. But what might a person not like about Primal the Awakening? Well, if you are really into deck construction, and you come into this thinking that it's going to be a big deck construction experience, this is not Magic the Gathering. It is not Marvel Champions. You are building a 20-card deck with your weapon prescribing the number of each of the 4 types of cards that you can include. It always adds up to 20. You start out with 24 cards to choose from, meaning you're only going to leave out 4. And then over the course of the campaign, you will add 4 more cards from each from one of 5 paths. You'll add 2 at level 1 and 2 more at level 2. And so if you're really into deck construction, that's only 8 excess cards that aren't going to be in your deck whenever you play. It's a far cry from Marvel Champions where you've got thousands of cards to choose from. Another thing someone might not like is that Primal is a long game. You're going to be playing an hour per character. Although the game is supposed to be really good with 3 characters, I just can't do that extra hour. And I tried it at 3 and I started with 2. Decided to try it with 3 to give you extra ability to manipulate the monster in different directions, and dropped it back down to 2 because that was just too long. The monster's hit points and everything scale with the player count. With 2 characters, you have less ability to control the facing of the monster, which is very important when there are certain areas on it that are invulnerable and certain areas that are made very dangerous by the creature's behavior cards. In the game playing behind me, I played for over 3 hours, which was too much while playing with only 2 characters, but I was talking a lot. I think that you can probably expect an hour a character. I go a little bit longer than that, but I play slowly. Someone might not like Primal the Awakening because that time comes from analysis paralysis. If you want a fast-playing game, this is not it. If you play quickly, you will lose. The game designers don't want to waste your long game time by making it too brutal. Losing a few 20-minute matches against Ultron in Marvel Champions is a lot different from losing a bunch of 3-hour matches here. So if you play well, you will probably win unless the matchup is just really poor. And then you'll adjust and come back and you'll almost certainly win your second game. Like I said, the gap between playing poorly and playing well, playing thoughtfully in Primal is one of the widest that I've ever seen. And then the fact that it's card-based play with very little randomness other than the card draws. This is deterministic enough that especially when you're talking about looking at the cards in multiple players' hands, because there are things that you can do to help the non-active character, there are multiple very different versions of ways to play the cards in your hand. So besides the hour per character playtime of the actual battle, somebody might not want to play this game if you don't want to spend a bunch of prep time between battles. So the actual campaign here is not super involved, it is not intrusive, but you are going to need to upgrade your characters and choose gear between battles. And just like in the gameplay, there are massive and plentiful decisions. This, to me, felt on par with adventure tactics in the preparation aspect. It's less on the class and the cards, but then when you add in all of the gear and how you'll spend your materials and harmonizing between the multiple characters, it's a ton. I spent another hour per character probably, and that's excessive. That's me. But you're going to spend some time upgrading your character because there's just so many options. The weapons and items and armor all have such different effects that you can take advantage of. And the way that they then balance together, if you change your mind, then you're going to be looking at everything else. It's honestly the upgrade a couple times when I was playing Primal was its own game session. I would sit down to play and I would just upgrade my characters and then be like, okay, I'm ready to play the battle. And I enjoyed that, but I could see someone not enjoying it. I don't want every game to be like that, but in Primal, I do accept it. Also, and here's one that I can't really qualify. Primal is too big. I didn't know how big this game was going to be. It's freaking enormous. Like I saw Monster Hunter and I saw how big that box is. And okay, so this extra space is because I have other things in here right now. It would sit flush, but still, like then I could take the 2 expansions and set them on top. So I mean, it's big and it was very expensive. I don't know that I could afford it today. Okay, so we will definitely be coming back to that. But first, let's talk about what people might like about Primal the Awakening. Component quality. Everything in this game feels like indestructible. If you watch the unboxing, I spent the longest time trying to figure out whether the player and monster boards are made out of some thin plastic like with chip theory games, or whether it really is just the linen finished cardstock. And I did not get a ding on a single card or player board, even though the corners are squared. And it's such nice material that, I mean, I religiously round corners because I play on neoprene and those things will snag. And yet I don't feel like I can touch them. And then you've got the vac form plastic. You see this one has the branding on it. It's so thick. I mean, this is just plastic. This is ridiculous. It still flexes when you take this massive thing out of the box, which you have to do every time you play if you're going to use their structure for us organizing, because the cards are all in the bottom one due to their weight. That's annoying. It does flex, but I mean, it's solid. It's not going to tear like one in a Come On game. The graphic design is fantastic. It's so clear and yet evocative of that Monster Hunter, like almost tribal style. The imagery is stylized and perfected. The minis are full of life and detail, but not overly busy, not like all textured up just for the sake of having texture. It's just a top-notch production, and it feels physically nice to play with the components. Here's where I get contrary. Someone might like Primal if they like deck construction, but don't want to spend more time building the deck than playing. Okay, so I said the prep time is huge, but there are only 8 extra cards to deal with once you have fully explored the branch. The cards are powerful, and there are different ways to utilize like keywords and to have things synchronized with the 5 different ability cards that also can be focused and used, are kind of permanently available to you. And so there are different ways that feel really different to play these characters. And yet, so only 4 extra cards being added throughout the course of your campaign, and only 8 extra cards total that you need to leave behind in the box when you make the deck. And yet it makes such a big difference when paired up with the abilities and how the game plays. There is a ton of replay value in trying these 5 different play styles for each of the characters and how they then harmonize with each other. You can turn someone into just an aggro beast, while another one blocks attrition damage and behavior cards like stealthily without ever drawing the monster's attention. The decision space in the deck construction is it's small, it's prescribed, like they thought of the different options, but the differences are very meaningful. The game is long. So someone might like Primal because the game is long. Okay, now sometimes it goes a little bit too long, but while in Marvel Champions, it's possible when you're playing against Rhino to just lose from a bad card draw. In Primal, you are going to get some bad draws, but the luck is smoothed out over the course of a very long game. You and the monster will each cycle through your cards repeatedly. You are both built to withstand this. The luck will even out. And the fact that you are cycling through your deck with 20 cards mean that the combos that you plan for, you will see pop up in your hand, especially because because you draw 5 cards, and then there are a lot of opportunities to draw extra cards depending on your build. Through the long game, you will learn the monster. In Dark Souls, I never felt like I learned the boss deck like you're supposed to, like to learn the patterns to mimic the video game. I thought it was a nice idea for somebody who had a really good memory, but I could not remember the order that the cards went in. But in Primal, you don't remember the order. You remember what is on the back of the behavior cards, what the symbols are, and then you compare that with what you know the monster does when that symbol gets revealed, when that symbol gets triggered. Here, in a 3-hour game, seeing the creature's 9 behavior cards repeatedly, towards hour 3, even I started remembering what they do. This is the learning of the patterns that happens in the Monster Hunter video game series. It is essential when you're playing monsters that can kill you in one hit in those video games that you learn the monster's tells. And that really is represented here. This learning of the pattern then will take your strategizing to new and like unforeseen heights as it gets added in over the course of those hours, leading to something else a player might like, lots of analysis paralysis. I like analysis paralysis. It doesn't, some people argue that analysis paralysis isn't even the same thing when you're playing solo. You're just taking your time and making your choices. You're not paralyzed by the stress of having people look at you. And yeah, I have to agree. I call it that because it's something everybody knows, as a term. And I've made entire videos about how I enjoy it. But there are some games where it's too much for me, where it feels like I'm given all of this information to synthesize and then it doesn't pay off. Here, the monster is punishing, like have no doubt about that. But you are an experienced, intelligent hunter. And you can take everything in and make the right call. In the Monster Hunter video game, I mained the Great Sword at least half the time. And mained another weapon that in half of its form is even slower, the Charge Blade. So the Great Sword is inspired by Guts from the Berserk manga series. And it's a sword which is like at least the weight of its wielder. When you swing that sword, you have dedicated. You can't interrupt it. It's going to hit the ground and then you are going to like bounce and stand there for a second recovering. But if you have studied the monster, it will pay off. If on the other hand you spam the button, you're going to lose fast. That is perfectly represented here in Primal. Another thing that someone will like about Primal is the spatial aspect of this game is through the roof. Every round, you will first pay to move one space and then you will play your cards. Now you can choose not to move and save that point of sweet, sweet stamina to combo even more cards. But then you have to draw 2 attrition cards and take the worse. And then you will also attract special punishments from certain reaction cards. You are this tiny little mosquito annoying this big creature. Do not stay still or you will get swatted. But sometimes you might make that trade-off if you are standing in a vulnerable quadrant and you don't have a way to move and make an attack, because you have to move before you attack, and the 2 quadrants you move to might be invulnerable. That's something that you should try to deal with by making characters go aggro and spin the monster for you, and that requires some foresight, like everything in this game. Because so the way that works is that you can play in your cards. Some of them have a little red emblem up in the corner that indicate gaining the creature's aggro. They're big, loud attacks that get the monster's attention and make them, at the end of your round, the monster will spin towards you. If you don't have aggro, then the monster maintains its facing. So you might want to make the monster spin just so that your partner can attack. But maybe there's a behavior that kicks off when the monster rotates. But maybe there's a reaction for somebody starting off in the front quadrant of the monster right in front of its fangs. Primal does more with 4 spaces than most games do with a table-sized grid. You also might like Primal if you like Marvel Champions. The similarities are unavoidable. The 4 colors represent different offensive and defensive aspects of the combat, although you will have a mix of all the colors, even though you favor certain ones depending on your weapon. The attrition that you face and you need to prepare defenses for, though that costs you in attacks. The struggle in Primal feels a lot like the scheming of a villain, though it builds to an unavoidable attack rather than an absolute loss or the change of a chapter. There are multiple chapters each baddie goes through as it grows more furious and desperate to cause it to behave differently, just like the villains in Marvel Champions. I will say, though, that I think that if you like Marvel Champions, you will find this Primal the Awakening different enough that there is more than enough room for both in your collection. There's the spatial aspect. There's a much longer game time that smooths out bad luck. There's the greater focus on combos, which is actually like really crucial in Primal rather than being a good bonus in Marvel Champions. At least that's how I feel about it. And there is a very careful balance created by having a much smaller pool of cards to uh, deck construct with. And then there is the very really carefully balanced different play styles kind of curated by the designers for each character by having a much smaller pool of cards to choose from that sets it apart from Marvel Champions. Someone might like Primal because of the theme. Yes, if you like Monster Hunter, but also every mechanism is really tied to something thematic. It makes sense in the narrative of the game, even if it's only given a couple of words of explanation, like on the title of a card. Stick and Move would be the name of a dodge card, where you would get a bonus if you play it after successfully attacking. Charged Finisher would be the title of a attack card that would cost 4 stamina and can only happen after another attack. How are you going to pay for that with only a 5-card draw? With a good combo, of course. Every mechanism has a thematic reason to exist while also being sound from a gameplay point of view. This game feels like wearing down a huge bully of a monster. I love Marvel Champions, as you know, but the things that happen, like that are actually happening based on the cards that you play, it can get a bit abstract, while Primal makes everything very concrete. Something that I did not mention in the things that players might not like, but should have, is that there may be too many things to keep track of, especially because the game state keeps changing with each draw of the cards and each reset of the monster's reaction cards. And I am very sensitive to tracking things in games. It is not something that I enjoy, but I feel like they put so much in because they figured out a way to make it part of the fun. This game makes my head spin, and yet I love it. You distract the beast from feeling its struggle and flipping out, but you pay attention to what will set off a reaction, and you pay attention to which of your cards will combo, and to how the other inactive character can assist, and to where you can move to where the terrain will give you the biggest benefit, but also sure to play enough defense to avoid the attrition damage, or to totally restructure your move to use this card to cancel the attrition damage out altogether, and also try to fulfill the requirements on the back of your special move card so that you can focus it and gain its game-changing superpower that's obscured on the other side of the card. I've never played a game that has as much interrelated stuff going on. Every decision can be made better the more you think about it. And that's why it doesn't bother me. I'll be like, I really feel stuck. I really feel like I'm about to be crushed. And then I will just sit there for a minute and I will look over everything. And you always find something that you could do a little bit better. And very often something that will get you totally out of trouble if you are clever enough, if you think hard enough. And that's how they made this work. I still think that maybe it wouldn't work for everybody, but know that I am sensitive to that and it worked for me. Except for the round tracking. I like 50% of the time I can't remember because it's not on. They give you a fantastic little player aid, but it doesn't say move the round. I guess they think that because it's a round, it shows the state of a round that you realize at the beginning every time you should move the round tracker. Besides that, after you play 10 rounds, to lose like that is miserable. I don't think that's okay. So I've decided, at first, I just accidentally couldn't track it, and now I just don't bother. So the funny thing about talking about how much there is to track and how I actually feel like it's fun is that I, at one point, was unsure about if I would keep the game. For a few nights playing level 0 and then several times on level 1. There are levels 0 through 3, and then if you have the Nightmare expansion, which came as the Kickstarter stretch goals, but I don't know if it's exclusive. It's not packaged like something exclusive, but I have no idea if anything's going to hit retail. Anyway, sorry. There are nightmare versions of levels 1 through 3 where you can swap cards out to make it even more difficult. So, like I said, I spent a few evenings playing level 0 and 1. I was like, yeah, this game is good. It's really good, but it's also really big and really expensive. And if I sell it now, people are hyped about it. So am I going to keep it? Am I going to clear out, and I'll get back to this, 10 games to make room for this? Well, then I got to level 2. And suddenly the monster health doubled, but the extra powers on the weapons, armor, and items just went to the next level. They went from things to be, yeah, that's a good bonus, to essential. Suddenly I had 4, 6, or even 8 powers to deal with. And that changed constantly between battles as I used the material carved from these monsters to build even bigger, better weapons and armor with better effects. Add that to all the considerations that I stated above, and more that it would take me too long to describe. And while this game absolutely made my head spin, I knew that once I played level 2, I knew that this was a game that I had to keep. Primal: The Awakening is a great game. It is a game that makes you feel smart because you have to be smart about how you play it. This game tells stories with every card played. This game feels as big, and these battles feel as epic as those ridiculous maxi minis. Like, I love Primal: The Awakening. But still, does it replace 10 other games? So you saw the size of it. With its width, Primal: The Awakening will not fit on a Calyx shelf. When I backed this, I did not realize how big it would be. I think that it was a misstep to make this game. I'm sure that they agonized over how to fit everything in. It's beautifully designed. There's a lot of extra air in these minis that float in the box, but how else are you going to do it with the minis? But it is a little bit too wide to fit in a Calyx. And you know that a Calyx will fit 4 games. I keep looking towards my Calyx. If you're wondering what I'm looking at, a Calyx cubby will fit 4 games and usually have a little wiggle room. Primal is 5 games wide. Okay, that's okay. I have big shelves downstairs, shelves tall enough where I can store the 2 Primal expansions on top of the coffin box so that it doesn't take up any more width than those 5 games. And the shelves are 2 games deep. But here's the thing, that I actually use the shelves to store game supplies and even some games that are like family games that just don't get played enough for me to want to display them, but I'll go to the trouble of digging it out for a family situation. I do keep games in my second row. I can't get rid of my game supplies. So I'm going to make room for Primal by taking 10 games off of my shelf, 5 games wide and 2 games deep. Here's the thing. Primal had me asking, this game that I love, is it worth 10 games? But the thing is, it didn't have to be. And the world, I'm just going to put this out there as an excuse. The world was a different place when Primal came out. When the designers were going through all the planning for it, especially because that was before the Kickstarter even happened. The world was a different place. But even so, Primal cost me $250 shipped. Admittedly with 1 expansion, but it was the half-priced affordable expansion that gives you the extra heroes, because I tend to get the most value out of extra playable characters, and I learned that from Marvel Champions. And I had heard several people say that they felt like the most variability came out of the heroes as well. Okay, so $250 to get the base game and 1 small expansion. It was like the $25 expansion rather than the $50 expansion. Oathsworn cost me half that much because I didn't get the minis. It also fits comfortably in a Calyx cube with another game. or two actually, I think, because I didn't get the minis. That should have been an option. Yes, these minis are great, and I know that there are a lot of people who want them, will love them, will think that they are worth it, both in space and in cost, and board games are physical, and I fully acknowledge that. But you don't really need these enormous minis to enjoy this game, and I don't think that it's worth those huge trade-offs. Each monster could have been a cardboard spinner looked at from the top down. You could have turned it to the quadrant that it needs to face. But extra SKUs, right? They cost, and no one wants the mini-list version. I bought Oathsworn, Witcher Old World, Dungeons of Infinity, and Dungeon Universalis, all without the optional minis. I haven't gotten Dungeons of Infinity yet, but I have to say that otherwise I've been very happy with my decision, and I have been very grateful to have that option. And here's the sticking part for it being in such a huge coffin box. Primal's campaign is my sort of campaign. It's unobtrusive. The extra in Primal that every massive boss battler needs comes from the character upgrading. But that means it doesn't feel like a lifestyle game in that way, in that giant campaign way. Don't get me wrong. I think that this game is almost infinitely replayable with all of the permutations of all of the different variables, being able to play the monsters at effectively like 7 different levels each, at each of the players having 5 very different play styles at playing with. I have 6 player characters that can be mixed, paired up in so many different ways. Like you mix all that together, and this is a game with a ton of very real feeling variety. But when you look at these lifestyle games, mostly you see ones that have huge campaigns that it takes hundreds of hours to get through. With Primal, you take it and you play it for a week, or you play a one-off expedition, which to me feels like too much trouble, but it's there as an option. The Mount Havoc expansion introduced the rules for a 3-round mini campaign, which, I mean, the rules feel pretty obvious. I think anybody could come up with them. It just takes you, like I said, your characters have those 3 levels, and so you just go through them. And I think that mini campaign is going to be my preferred way to play Primal. I think I'll be able to get it to the table when I'm taking it. I'm choosing three baddies to face off against, maybe randomly, maybe choosing. You're supposed to do it randomly, but their randomizers don't include, in Mount Havoc, only include half of the baddies, so I'd have to come up with my own method anyway. Then I could have one evening of playing a battle, one evening of planning out my characters. It's simplified in it, so I probably wouldn't take that, but you get my point. It's very easy to take off the shelf and play for a week the way that I like to play games, and then put it back on the shelf. And while that's my preferred way to play the vast majority of games, it is not the lifestyle game way to play a game. But there is another way that Primal could have been a lifestyle game. Without the coffin box of maxi minis, this could have been a lifestyle board game. It's that good. It could have been a lifestyle board game in the same way that Eon's End and Fantasy Flight living card games are, where they drip feed you constant content monthly or quarterly. You know, Eon's End putting out a big box standalone expansion every year and giving you, I think, 2 or 3 expansions tied to each of those quarterly. So that makes me say they wouldn't have made this game wouldn't have made enough money without the giant minis to motivate people to take a chance. That's a part of the business that I am not qualified to comment on. I don't know how the Kickstarter would have been without those huge, beautiful minis. But I know that with those giant minis, it is now impossible to send this game to retail in those small upgrade amounts. Like the player boards are set at the width of the box size. The expansions, not that dimension, but that dimension. Like these player boards are wide. They're made to fit in this. which means that you can't have, like, if they were Eon's End size and they didn't come with minis, or they came with the small character minis, the bad guys, if they had a spinner, I could envision a world where this had become the next Marvel Champions or Eon's End. I absolutely would have bought extra packs of heroes and monsters the same way that I regularly buy $15 hero decks of Marvel Champions or $20 expansions with 2 mages and 2 nemesis in Eon's End before I overfilled my Legacy of Gravehold box. Primal the Awakening is that good. It belongs in the same conversation. It deserves to have people complaining, do we really need more? Every time it comes up. But it won't happen because the form factor of the game is set, and it has been based around huge player boards, huge monster boards, huge minis, which means an enormous game box and a lot of freight. So even though I decided that this is a game that I need to keep in my gaming life for the foreseeable future, I did not want to figure out 10 games to sell to make room for it. So I did this, fitting everything in the game in my 2 expansion boxes, except for the minis. You know, this really did require deciding that Primal is now my game, because its resale value is going to be fractional as I have tossed out the inserts in that giant coffin box, which makes it effectively useless. And I will get rid of the box once I've emotionally let go of it or I've figured out what to do with it. By the way, let me know what you guys do with empty game boxes. I've seen people make like modular dungeon rooms with them, which seems really cool. That's obviously way too deep to do that with. I could see turning that into wall art, because you see the way that the image wraps around the front. That would be really striking. The art's great. Anyway, so now Primal takes up about 1.5 board games worth of space on my Calyx shelf. It's one box in front of the other. It overhangs the back by about 1/2 inch, which drives me absolutely insane. But I'll live with it. I put a few of those giant maxi mini monsters accessible on shelves as decoration, because the thing is that you only need one. That's another approach they could have done, is had a generic maxi mini to just rotate around to show the facing. And the rest of them I put in an underbed storage to use with not only Primal, but also to make it easily accessible to play miniature agnostic games like Doomed Apocalyptic Horror Hunting. I am absolutely not anti-mini. I appreciate the physicality of board games. I print minis on my 3D printer, but there are serious drawbacks to making so many gigantic minis mandatory for owning your game. I can't just flat out recommend Primal the Awakening, which absolutely sucks, because it is brilliant, but it is also huge and expensive. And I'm sure that it will be more expensive on the reprint, which, with as successful as the campaign was and how well the game has been received, seems pretty inevitable. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about how you fit a game this size physically into your life, or how you justify spending that much money on a game just to get into the game. You know, I just want to talk about how much I love Primal the Awakening, like to a degree where it feels like this game was designed specifically for me. I'm so glad for the care Reggie Games put into Primal. I'm glad for that over 3-year wait, because it means that the product I received is just beyond excellent. And I'm really, really happy that it hit Kickstarter back when I had much more expendable hobby money to put into a game that I had never played, and before I was jaded by Kickstarter first pressings, first releases, initial releases, and before I was worrying about over full shelves. Now, though, with the state of the world and my reduced hobby money, I honestly don't think that I would have even considered backing Primal. Not as a risk. It would have been hard to justify getting it even if I was able to play it and know that it's a fantastic game for me at that price and size. And that really sucks because I think it could be in everyone's best interest to make this game more accessible, including Reggie games. Primal the Awakening should be a lifestyle game. That's the review, with the should pointing in one direction and the rest of the sentence pointing in the other. You choose.